They say that marrying into money is like stepping into a fairy tale. But they never tell you that some fairy tales are actually horror stories in disguise. When I married Daniel Brooks, a charming self-made millionaire, people told me I was lucky. My friends congratulated me, my family breathed a sigh of relief, and even strangers looked at me differently. A big house, expensive cars, vacations in Italy. What could possibly go wrong? The first year was everything I thought marriage would be. We laughed, traveled, and decorated our beautiful home in the suburbs of Chicago. I thought I had finally found my forever. But slowly, small cracks began to show. Cracks that no one else seemed to notice but me. It started with the phone calls he took in the middle of the night, speaking in a low voice, pacing in the hallway. Then came the locked drawers in his home office, drawers I had never been allowed to open, and the business trips. Oh, the endless business trips that kept getting longer, with no photos, no souvenirs, not even a receipt left behind. I told myself it was just work stress. After all, Daniel had built his company from scratch. Maybe he was just protecting me from business problems I didn't need to worry about. But the feeling in my gut refused to go away. I'd walk into a room and see him quickly closing his laptop. I'd hear footsteps late at night when I knew he was supposed to be asleep. I started to wonder, was this paranoia, or was my perfect marriage hiding something? One evening, I decided to ask him directly. We were having dinner, just the two of us, candlelight flickering between us. "Daniel," I said, trying to sound casual, "is everything okay? You've been distant lately." He smiled, that same charming smile that had won me over years ago, and said, "Everything's fine, sweetheart, you just need to trust me." I wanted to believe him. God knows I wanted to. But that night, as I lay awake listening to him type away in his office at 2 a.m., I realized trust wasn't enough anymore. I needed answers. And that's when the idea first crossed my mind, an idea that made me feel guilty just for thinking it. What if I installed cameras in the house? The thought haunted me for days. I'd catch myself staring at the corners of our living room, imagining tiny cameras hidden in plain sight. Every time Daniel left for work, I'd feel the urge to act, but fear held me back. What if he found out? What if I was wrong, and this was all just my imagination? Then something happened that pushed me over the edge. One Saturday morning, I went into the laundry room to grab a sweater from the dryer. Tucked in the pocket was a small receipt. Nothing unusual, except it was from a jewelry store downtown. The date on it was from 2 days ago. The item? A gold bracelet. The price? $3,200. Daniel had never bought me jewelry outside of birthdays or anniversaries, and he certainly hadn't given me a gold bracelet recently. I held the receipt in my hand, my heart pounding. When I asked him about it later, he didn't even blink. "It's for a business client," he said smoothly, "a retirement gift." That was the moment my doubt turned into determination. I waited until he left for another overnight business trip the following week. Then, I drove to an electronics store 2 towns over and bought a set of discreet security cameras. One small enough to hide behind bookshelves, in kitchen cabinets, and even in the hallway light fixtures. My hands shook as I set them up, each click of the drill feeling like a betrayal of my wedding vows. But I reminded myself, I wasn't breaking our marriage. I was protecting myself from whatever truth was hiding behind his charming smile. The first few days, nothing happened. I checked the recordings religiously, only to see empty rooms, the hum of the refrigerator, and the soft flicker of the TV. Part of me hoped it would stay that way. That I'd look back on this in a few months and laugh at how paranoid I'd been. But on the 4th night, I got my first hit. Daniel was supposed to be at a conference in New York. Instead, the camera in the living room caught him walking in with a woman I had never seen before. She was younger, dressed in a sleek black dress, her hand resting far too comfortably on his arm. They sat on our couch, drinking wine, laughing like they belonged there. My couch, my home, my life. And then they went upstairs. "My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I wasn't born into wealth, far from it. My parents owned a small diner off the interstate, and from the time I was tall enough to see over the counter, I was pouring coffee and taking orders. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I guess that's why I never really fit into Daniel's world. He grew up in Chicago's North Shore, went to private schools, graduated from Northwestern, and started his own tech company before he was 30. By the time I met him at a charity gala, he was already a millionaire several times over. I was there volunteering as a coordinator, making sure the auction ran smoothly. He was there as one of the biggest donors. He was charming, attentive, and most importantly, he made me feel seen. I wasn't just the waitress's daughter to him. He asked me about my dreams, my hobbies, my favorite books. I didn't even realize he was flirting until he asked me to dinner. We dated for a year before he proposed. I remember standing in the middle of my parents' diner, still wearing my apron, when he walked in with a small velvet box. He got down on one knee, right between table 6 and table 7, in front of a group of truck drivers eating pancakes. I said yes before he could even finish the question. Moving into his world was like stepping into another universe. His house was bigger than the diner and my childhood home combined. We had a gardener, a housekeeper, and even a driver. At first, I felt like an imposter, like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. But Daniel always told me I belonged. "You're my wife, Emily," he'd say. "This is your home now." I believed him. I believed every word, and I worked hard to be the kind of wife I thought he deserved. I learned how to host dinner parties, how to pick the right wine, how to navigate conversations about mergers and acquisitions without sounding lost. I even left my job at the diner so I could focus on supporting his career. Looking back now, I wonder if that was my first mistake, giving up my own life to live in his. Because when the cracks started to show, I had nowhere else to stand but on the ground he controlled. And once the cameras revealed the truth, that ground would start to crumble beneath me. In the first 2 years of our marriage, everything seemed perfect, at least on the surface. Daniel and I traveled to Europe twice, hosted charity dinners, and attended black tie galas. I learned how to walk in designer heels without wobbling, how to smile for endless photographs without showing how exhausted I really was, and how to nod politely while the wives of other CEOs compared their children's private school achievements. But beneath all the sparkle, I never stopped feeling like an outsider. I missed the sound of my mom's coffee maker sputtering in the morning, the smell of bacon frying in the diner kitchen, the casual conversations with customers who knew my name. In Daniel's world, everything was formal. Every event felt like a performance. My husband was different too. When we were dating, he'd call me every evening just to hear my voice. He'd surprise me with flowers from the farmer's market, or take me to my favorite diner for pie. Now he was always too busy or too tired. Our conversations over dinner became shorter, sometimes dominated by his phone buzzing on the table. Still, I told myself this was normal. Every marriage goes through phases. Maybe once his company stabilized, things would go back to the way they were. Daniel had qualities I admired: his ambition, his discipline, his ability to walk into any room and command attention. But those same qualities had a shadow side. He hated losing, and he hated being questioned even more. If I asked too many questions about his work or his travel, he'd get defensive. "Emily, I need you to trust me," he'd say, his tone calm but sharp enough to cut. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe we were still the same couple who once shared pancakes in my parents' diner. But then came the little things I couldn't ignore. There was the night he came home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. The weekend he canceled a trip with me because of urgent meetings, but didn't answer my calls for nearly 24 hours. The unexplained charges on our joint credit card, expensive dinners, boutique hotel stays, luxury gifts I'd never seen. I tried to convince myself these were coincidences, misunderstandings. After all, I wasn't perfect either. I had my flaws, like my tendency to overthink, my reluctance to speak up when something bothered me, and my fear of confrontation. But there was one thing I knew for certain: I wasn't imagining the growing distance between us. And when I finally saw what the cameras captured, I realized that distance wasn't just emotional, it was physical. And it was happening right in the heart of my own home. The house Daniel bought for us was a sprawling 2-story mansion in an exclusive gated community just outside of Boston. The kind of place that made you lower your voice without even realizing it, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the perfect stillness. It had polished marble floors that echoed with every step, a kitchen the size of my old apartment, and a master bedroom with a balcony overlooking a perfectly manicured lawn. The neighbors were CEOs, doctors, and politicians. Everyone waved politely, but conversations were brief, like everyone was always late for something important. At first, I felt proud walking through those front doors. The air smelled faintly of lavender and new furniture. The walls were freshly painted in calming shades of cream and beige, and the art hanging in the hallway looked like it belonged in a museum. I thought I had stepped into the kind of life I'd only seen in magazines. But the longer I lived there, the more I noticed the silence. In my parents' modest home, you could always hear something: music from the kitchen radio, the hum of the washing machine, my dad talking to the dog. Here, there was only the faint ticking of a designer clock and the occasional hum of the central air. Daniel's schedule kept him away most evenings. When he was home, he'd retreat to his private office on the first floor, a room I rarely entered. He said it was for work only, but sometimes I'd hear muffled voices from behind the closed door. It could have been phone calls, but they didn't always sound like business. There were staff members, too: a housekeeper named Rosa who came 3 times a week, a gardener who maintained the grounds, and a driver named Carl who was always on call for Daniel. They were polite but reserved, careful not to say too much. Rosa especially seemed cautious around me, as though she knew something I didn't. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I was in the living room flipping through a magazine when I heard the front door close. I assumed it was Daniel, home early, but when I looked, it was Carl. He seemed surprised to see me, muttered something about dropping off documents, and quickly disappeared into Daniel's office. A few minutes later, I heard the office door open, followed by low laughter. I told myself I was imagining things. This was Daniel's world, formal, busy, and full of people whose lives I didn't fully understand. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. The mansion didn't feel like our home. It felt like Daniel's domain, and I was merely a guest. And a guest can be asked to leave at any time. A week later, I had my first real wives' brunch with the neighborhood women. It was held at a country club just a few miles away, a place with crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and staff that greeted you by name. Most of the women were in their 40s and 50s, perfectly styled with flawless hair and designer handbags that probably cost more than my old car. They smiled warmly, but I could feel the subtle scanning in their eyes, the way they measured me up before deciding exactly how much interest I deserved. "So, Emily," one of them asked between sips of champagne, "how's married life treating you?" I smiled and gave the safe, polite answer. "It's been wonderful. Daniel is very supportive." There was a pause, then another woman leaned in slightly. "Supportive is good. Just be careful with his schedule. You know how these men are: late nights, business trips, urgent meetings." Her tone was light, but her eyes held something else. I laughed politely, but inside I was unsettled. Was she warning me? Or was this just the way wealthy circles worked? Subtle jabs wrapped in social niceties? When I returned home, Daniel was already there, which was unusual for a weekday afternoon. He was in the kitchen, pouring himself a drink, and looked startled when I walked in. "You're back early," he said, quickly setting the glass down. "So are you," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. He smiled faintly. "Meeting got cancelled. Thought I'd take the chance to relax." But his eyes flicked toward the hallway, and in that split second, I could have sworn I heard movement upstairs. Before I could say anything, Rosa appeared from the direction of the staircase, holding a silver tray. "Just bringing some tea," she said softly, avoiding my eyes. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but something had shifted in me. It wasn't one big thing, it was the accumulation of little moments. Carl arriving unexpectedly, laughter behind closed doors, veiled comments from strangers, and Rosa's nervous glances. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered through the darkened house. The marble floors were cold under my bare feet, and the only light came from the dim glow of the outdoor lanterns. As I passed Daniel's office, I noticed the door was ajar. Inside, his desk was spotless except for a single envelope. My curiosity warred with my better judgment, but before I could decide, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I slipped away quickly, heart pounding. I told myself there was probably nothing in that envelope, that I was making stories in my head. But the seed of doubt had been planted. And seeds, once planted, have a way of growing, whether you want them to or not. 2 days after the brunch, I decided to go through the weekly receipts that Rosa usually left on the kitchen counter. She always kept everything neat: grocery slips, dry cleaning bills, deliveries. But this time, tucked between the papers, there was a folded receipt from a high-end jewelry store. The date was from last week, and the item listed was a diamond bracelet worth more than my annual college tuition. It hadn't been for me. I knew that instantly. That night, I asked Daniel casually if he had bought anything special lately. He barely looked up from his phone. Just some work expenses. Why? Oh, nothing, just curious. His dismissive tone made my stomach twist. I wanted to ask more, but I knew better. Confrontation without proof would only make him careful. The next day, I ran into Carl again, this time outside the local cafe. He greeted me like an old friend. "Emily, how's the palace life?" he teased. I smiled politely. "It's interesting." Carl's eyes scanned my face and his grin faded. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice, "I've known Daniel for years. I like you, and I don't want to meddle, but just keep your eyes open. Not everything is as perfect as it looks." That warning stayed with me. Carl wasn't the type to speak without reason. Later that evening, while Daniel was in his office, I found Rosa in the laundry room folding linens. "Rosa," I asked softly, "has anyone been visiting while I'm out?" Her hands froze for a moment, then she shook her head quickly. "No, ma'am, only deliveries." But her eyes darted away, betraying her nerves. That night, I lay in bed next to Daniel, staring at the ceiling while he scrolled on his phone. The soft light from the screen lit up his face, and I wondered what messages he was reading, or who he was writing to. By now, I had learned to read between the lines of our life together. His absences, the jewelry receipt, the sudden phone calls that made him step out of the room, the whispers of warning from people who barely knew me. I didn't have a full picture yet, but I was beginning to see the outline of the man I had married, and it wasn't the one I thought I knew. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth, because once you know, you can't unknow. 2 evenings later, Daniel announced he'd be home late for a business dinner. I nodded, pretending it didn't bother me, but the minute he left, I sat in the quiet living room, hearing the ticking of the antique clock echo in the space. Something in me had shifted. I was done ignoring my instincts. I picked up my phone and called my friend Jenna. She wasn't part of Daniel's social circle, thankfully, and she had known me long before all this wealth and confusion. "Jenna," I said, "can you meet me tomorrow morning, somewhere private?" When we met at a small bakery across town, I told her about the jewelry receipt, Carl's warning, and Rosa's strange reaction. She listened without interrupting, then leaned forward. "Emily, you need to protect yourself. If something is going on, you can't just wait for him to tell you. Get proof." Quietly. Her advice echoed in my mind all day. That evening, I was clearing the dining table when Daniel's phone buzzed on the counter. He was upstairs, showering. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize, Alyssa, and a heart emoji next to it. The phone stopped buzzing before I could think, but the sound of water running upstairs gave me courage. My heart pounded as I picked it up. The last message previewed on the lock screen read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was perfect." My chest tightened. I put the phone back exactly where it was, my hands trembling. When Daniel came down, dressed in casual clothes, he gave me a kiss on the cheek as if nothing was wrong. "Early dinner?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Sure." Inside, my mind was spinning. I knew now that Jenna was right. I couldn't just sit here hoping the truth would reveal itself. I needed to take steps, and I needed to do it without tipping him off. After dinner, while Daniel took a call in his office, I sat in the living room scrolling through my laptop. I searched for discreet security cameras, tiny ones that could be hidden in plain sight. My finger hovered over the purchase button. I knew this was crossing a line, but what line hadn't Daniel already crossed? As I clicked confirm order, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. This was it, the first real move in uncovering the truth. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. No matter what I found, I would not let Daniel rewrite the story of my life. The cameras arrived 3 days later, tucked inside an unmarked brown box. I'd chosen models small enough to hide inside decorative items, picture frames, potted plants, even the hollow base of a lamp. Daniel was away at a charity golf tournament for the weekend, which gave me the perfect window to set them up without his knowledge. Rosa had the day off, so the house was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. I moved from room to room with steady hands, carefully placing each camera in the most strategic angles. The living room, dining area, Daniel's home office, and even the hallway outside the master bedroom, all covered. The system connected to a secure app on my phone, giving me live access from anywhere. As I tightened the last screw inside the lamp base, I caught my reflection in the mirror across the room. My face looked different, harder, more determined. This wasn't the naive newlywed who had moved into this house a year ago. This was a woman preparing for battle. That night, Daniel returned earlier than expected. He was in a surprisingly good mood, telling me about a lucrative investment he'd been working on. "Everything's lining up perfectly," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I smiled back, careful not to let my thoughts show. I'd learned to wear my own mask around him. Over the next week, I checked the camera feed sparingly, not wanting to become obsessed. For the first few days, there was nothing unusual. Daniel worked in his office, made phone calls, and spent long stretches at the country club. But then, on a Wednesday afternoon, while I was out grocery shopping, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the dining room camera. I tapped the notification. The live feed showed Daniel and a woman I'd never seen before. She was tall, with dark hair and a confident posture, wearing a silk blouse and pencil skirt. Daniel poured her a glass of wine, and they sat at the table talking, laughing. My chest tightened. I zoomed in slightly. Her hand brushed his as she reached for the wine glass. I couldn't hear their conversation, but the body language was intimate, far beyond a business meeting. They stayed for nearly 2 hours before she left, Daniel walking her to the door like a perfect gentleman. When he came home that evening, carrying a bag of takeout, he greeted me like nothing had happened. And in that moment, I knew I was only scratching the surface of whatever life Daniel was living behind my back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to Daniel's steady breathing beside me, my mind replaying the scene from the dining room over and over. Who was she? Why did she look so comfortable in our home? The next morning, while Daniel showered, I slipped into his home office. The faint scent of his cologne lingered in the air. I opened his desk drawer and found his leather-bound appointment book, a habit he still kept despite having every digital tool at his disposal. Flipping through the pages, I noticed an entry from the day before. L. Bennett, lunch meeting, 1 p.m. No company name. No context. I took a quick photo with my phone before carefully putting everything back. Later that day, I looked up L. Bennett online. A LinkedIn profile popped up for Lauren Bennett, a corporate attorney known for handling high-profile mergers. Her photo confirmed she was the same woman from the camera footage. It didn't make sense. Why would Daniel entertain her at our dining table instead of his office or a public place? I decided to dig deeper. Over the next week, I monitored the cameras more closely. Most days were routine, but on Friday afternoon, there she was again, Lauren Bennett, this time in Daniel's home office. They stood close together, reviewing papers, but their proximity was unmistakably personal. At one point, Daniel placed a hand on her lower back as he leaned in to speak. My stomach nodded. Still, I forced myself to keep watching, to gather as much information as possible. If there was one thing I'd learned from my past, it was that acting without proof only gave the other person power to twist the truth. That weekend, Daniel suggested we host a small dinner party for some important contacts. I agreed, masking my growing suspicion. The night of the party, our dining room sparkled under the glow of the chandelier. Daniel introduced me to his guests, all smiles and charm. And then, walking through the door was Lauren Bennett, dressed in an elegant black dress. She greeted Daniel warmly, her hand lingering in his just a moment too long. When she turned to me, her smile was polite but cool, like she already knew her position in the unspoken hierarchy. We exchanged pleasantries, but my mind was racing. Throughout the evening, I caught Daniel glancing at her across the table, and once, when they thought no one was looking, their knees brushed beneath the tablecloth. By the time the last guest left, my resolve had hardened. If Daniel thought I was blind, he was about to find out just how much I'd already seen. The Monday after the dinner party, the house felt heavier. Even the sunlight streaming through the tall windows couldn't cut through the weight pressing on my chest. Daniel left early for an important meeting. I waited until the sound of his car faded down the driveway before pulling out my phone and reviewing the weekend's footage. There it was. Clear as day. Daniel and Lauren in the kitchen after most guests had left, speaking in low voices. She leaned against the counter, her body angled toward him. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The moment was short, but the intimacy was unmistakable. I paused the video, staring at the still image. My pulse pounded in my ears. For hours, I couldn't focus on anything else. The image played in my mind while I tried to read, while I watered the plants, while I made dinner. By the time Daniel came home, I had barely eaten. He noticed. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, his voice dripping with concern that didn't feel genuine. "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a small smile. "Just tired." That night, after he fell asleep, I sat in the dark living room. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, each sound a reminder that time was passing, and I was still sitting here, doing nothing. It wasn't just about Lauren anymore. It was about everything. The strange phone calls, the missing hours, the way Daniel kept me at arm's length when it came to his work. I thought about the woman I used to be before I met him. Independent, sharp, capable of making decisions without fear of someone else's reaction. Somewhere along the way, I had let that version of myself slip away. The next morning, I called my older brother Michael. We hadn't spoken in months, not since I'd married Daniel, and gotten swept into his world. He picked up on the second ring. "Emily? Everything okay?" I hesitated before answering. "No, not really. I think I need your help." Michael listened quietly as I told him about the cameras, the footage, and my growing suspicion. He didn't interrupt, but when I finished, his voice was firm. "You need to be smart about this. Don't confront him until you know exactly what you're dealing with. And Emily, keep yourself safe." His words echoed in my head long after we hung up. That afternoon, I started making copies of the footage. One on my laptop, one on a flash drive I hid in the bottom of my jewelry box, and one uploaded to a secure cloud account Daniel didn't know about. Because if this was going to get ugly, I needed to make sure I had the truth in more than one place. 2 days later, I decided to test the waters. Daniel had mentioned he'd be home late because of client drinks, so I used the evening to gather more observations. I dressed in something casual and drove to a small cafe a few blocks from his office. From there, I had a clear view of the building's main entrance. I ordered coffee, settled into a corner seat, and waited. An hour passed, then another. Finally, around 8:45 p.m., I spotted Daniel, only he wasn't alone. Lauren was with him, and they were laughing as they walked toward his car. He opened the passenger door for her, a gesture he hadn't done for me in months. They drove off together. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't follow them. Instead, I noted the time and place. This wasn't about catching him in the act right now. It was about building a timeline. When Daniel got home close to midnight, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV. He kissed my forehead, smelling faintly of whiskey and Lauren's floral perfume. "Long day?" I asked lightly. "You know how it is," he said, loosening his tie. "Clients can talk forever." I nodded, hiding my hands so he wouldn't see they were trembling. The next morning, I met Michael at a diner we used to go to as kids. I laid out everything: the camera footage, the cafe stakeout, the inconsistencies in Daniel's schedule. Michael leaned back, crossing his arms. "Emily, this is bigger than just an affair. The way he's covering his tracks, there's something else here." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Money, business deals, maybe even something illegal. People don't get this careful unless they've got more to hide than a relationship." His words sent a chill down my spine. I'd been so focused on Lauren that I hadn't considered the possibility of something darker. We agreed on a plan. I'd keep gathering evidence without tipping Daniel off. Michael would reach out to a friend who used to work in corporate investigations. That night, lying beside Daniel in bed, I stared at the ceiling. He looked peaceful, almost innocent in sleep. But I knew better now. The charm, the generosity, the perfect husband facade, it was all just part of the act. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared. I wasn't just a wife wondering what her husband was up to anymore. I was a woman building her case. And when the truth finally came out, I wanted it to be undeniable. 3 days later, the first major break came, though not in the way I expected. I was reviewing the previous night's camera footage when I noticed something odd. Around 2:17 a.m., Daniel left our bedroom, still in his pajama pants, and went into his study. 10 minutes later, he was on a video call. I zoomed in on the screen and froze. It wasn't just Lauren. There was another man, older, wearing a suit even at that hour, and they were discussing something in hushed but urgent tones. I grabbed my earbuds to catch their words. Daniel said, "We can't let this go public. If anyone connects the account to me, it's over." The older man replied, "Then make sure she doesn't find out. Keep her distracted." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't about an affair anymore. There was money involved, big money. When Daniel returned to bed, I pretended to be asleep, my mind racing. Could she mean me? If so, then my husband wasn't just cheating, he was actively hiding something dangerous from me. The next morning, I called Michael. "You were right," I said without preamble. "There's something bigger going on." I played the footage for him. He watched in silence, his jaw tightening. "Emily, this looks like money laundering or fraud. If that's true, you're in danger just by being married to him." My pulse quickened. "What do I do?" "We need to get you out of the house and start making copies of every piece of evidence you can find, and you need to act like nothing's wrong. Can you do that?" I nodded, though he couldn't see me. That evening, I went through Daniel's desk while he was on the phone in the garden. I found a hidden compartment containing 2 passports, one US, one from a country I'd never visited, both with his picture, but different names. There was also a small USB drive. I slipped the USB into my sweater pocket just as I heard his footsteps approaching. He entered, smiling as if nothing were wrong. "Looking for something?" he asked. I forced a laugh. "Just trying to find a pen." He kissed my forehead and left the room, but I could feel his eyes on me until he turned the corner. For the first time since this began, I realized I wasn't just collecting evidence for a betrayal. I might be collecting evidence for a crime. And if I wasn't careful, I could be the next person he needed to keep quiet. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak in the house, every shadow shifting in the hallway felt like a threat. I kept the USB drive tucked under my pillow, afraid that if I left it anywhere else, it might disappear. By morning, I had a plan. Daniel was set to leave for a golf outing with his business partners, which would give me at least 5 hours alone in the house. When he finally drove off, I locked every door, pulled the curtains, and plugged the USB into my laptop. What I found was worse than anything I'd imagined. Dozens of scanned bank statements, offshore account details, and email exchanges between Daniel, Lauren, and several names I didn't recognize. The sums involved were staggering. Millions moving in and out of shell companies over the past 2 years. But it wasn't just financial. There were legal documents too. Wills, property deeds, all pointing to Daniel transferring assets under false names. I took photos of every file with my phone, then copied them onto my own encrypted drive. My hands shook the entire time. Just as I was finishing, my phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Meet me at the diner near the courthouse at noon. Urgent." I packed my laptop, the USB, and my phone, then left through the back door, taking the alley route to my car. At the diner, Michael slid into the booth across from me. I handed him my phone, showing him the photos. He scrolled silently, his expression darkening. "This is enough to bring to the police," he said finally. "But Emily, if we do this, Daniel will know it came from you. Are you ready for that?" My throat tightened. If I don't do this, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering when it will all blow up, and whether I'll go down with him. Michael nodded. "All right, I have a contact in financial crimes. We'll set up a meeting. But until then, you need to keep acting normal. No confrontations, no slip-ups." When I got home, Daniel was already back. His eyes searched my face. "Busy day?" I smiled. "Just errands." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You know, Emily, secrets have a way of ruining people. Best to keep life simple." It was a warning, and we both knew it. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I had the evidence. I had a plan. But the walls were closing in, and Daniel was starting to suspect me. If I made one wrong move, I wouldn't just lose my marriage. I might lose my freedom, or worse. The morning after Daniel's thinly veiled threat, I forced myself to go through the motions. Coffee, breakfast, casual conversation, pretending everything was fine. Inside, my nerves were frayed, but I knew Michael was right. If Daniel suspected I was moving against him, things could spiral fast. By mid-morning, I received a coded text from Michael. Meeting set. 3 p.m. downtown. That gave me just enough time to prepare my cover. I told Daniel I was meeting a friend for lunch, then heading to the art gallery to finalize a charity event. He seemed to buy it. At 3 p.m., I walked into a nondescript office building near the courthouse. Michael was already there, speaking to a woman in a navy suit with a badge clipped to her belt. Detective Harris from the Financial Crimes Unit. She got straight to the point. We've been looking into Daniel for months, but without someone on the inside, it's been hard to get solid evidence. What you have could break this case wide open. I slid the USB across the table. It's all there. Bank records, emails, property transfers. I also took photos of everything, just in case. Detective Harris nodded, her expression serious. This will help, but it's not enough. We need something current, proof he's still moving money, still involved. Can you get us that? The weight of her words sank in. You're asking me to keep spying on him. I'm asking you to protect yourself, she replied. If this blows up, Daniel will throw you under the bus. The more evidence we have, the safer you'll be. Michael leaned in. Emily, you've already gone this far. One more step could mean the difference between him walking free and facing justice. I swallowed hard. All right, tell me what you need. They gave me a list. Dates of upcoming transactions, names to listen for, any suspicious calls or meetings. It felt like stepping deeper into quicksand, but I agreed. By the time I left the building, the sun was low, painting the streets gold. I told myself I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for every person Daniel had cheated, every life he'd wrecked without a second thought. When I got home, Daniel was in his study, talking on the phone in a low voice. I paused in the hallway, straining to catch words. Transfer, Cayman, no, she doesn't suspect. He turned suddenly, spotting me. Emily, dinner reservations at 7. Wear the blue dress. I smiled, hiding my racing heart. Of course. That night, as I sat across from him in the dim glow of the restaurant, I couldn't stop wondering how much longer I could keep this facade before everything exploded. And then, halfway through dessert, Daniel's phone lit up with a message that made his face go pale. And I knew whatever came next would change everything. Daniel's hand tightened around his phone as his eyes darted toward me. Excuse me, he muttered, pushing his chair back. He stepped away from the table, heading toward the hallway that led to the restrooms, phone pressed to his ear. I watched his retreating figure, forcing myself to keep eating my crème brûlée, though my appetite had vanished. My phone buzzed quietly in my lap. It was a text from Michael. Be careful. We picked up chatter. Something's moving faster than we thought. My pulse quickened. I texted back. At dinner with him now. He got a message, looked spooked. A minute later, Daniel returned, his face schooled into a mask of calm, but his knee bounced under the table. Something came up with work. We'll have to cut the night short, he said, signaling for the check. The ride home was suffocatingly silent. I kept my gaze fixed on the blur of city lights outside the car window, pretending not to notice how often he glanced at me. When we pulled into the driveway, Daniel went straight to his study. I slipped upstairs, my heart pounding, and opened my laptop. I accessed the security camera feed, something I'd been doing every night. Tonight, though, there was movement in his study almost immediately. Daniel was pacing, phone in hand, speaking in a hushed but urgent tone. I hit record on the feed. No, it's too risky to send now. We'll move it through the secondary account. Yes, Cayman stays off the table for now, and make sure she never finds out. If she does, we're all finished. I felt a chill run through me. The she was me, no doubt about it. Suddenly, Daniel's voice stopped. He glanced toward the camera in the corner of the room, and for a terrifying moment I thought he'd seen it. But he turned back to his desk, pulling out a locked metal case. From it, he retrieved a thick envelope and began flipping through stacks of documents. I zoomed in. The papers had bank logos I recognized from the files I'd already collected, but these were stamped with confidential in bold red letters. Before I could get a clearer shot, he snapped the envelope shut and placed it back in the case. Then, to my horror, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out what looked like a handgun. He checked the magazine, tucked it into the waistband of his trousers, and left the study. I froze. The camera feed showed him heading toward the garage. My mind raced. Was he going to meet someone? Was I in danger right now? I grabbed my phone and called Michael. "He has a gun," I whispered. "He just left in the car. I think it's happening tonight." Michael's voice was sharp. "Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'll send someone over immediately. Don't open the door for anyone but us." I hung up and backed away from the window, every instinct screaming that this was the tipping point. Because if Daniel was desperate enough to arm himself, then whatever he was planning next could destroy us both. The night felt heavier than usual, the kind of weight that settled in my chest and made breathing a conscious effort. I sat on the couch with all the lights off, my phone clutched in my hand, waiting for Michael's call. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway was like a hammer against my nerves. Through the security feed on my laptop, I watched the empty driveway. No Daniel? Not yet. But my gut told me he wouldn't be gone for long. The phone finally buzzed. Michael's voice was brisk. "We tracked him to an industrial warehouse on the outskirts. He met with 2 men, both on our watch list. We're moving in now, but we need you to be ready. If he comes back before we get to him, stall him." "Stall him? Michael, he's armed," I whispered, my voice trembling. "That's why you stay calm. Lock the doors. Keep the cameras rolling. We might finally have enough to bring this whole thing down." After we hung up, I double-checked every lock in the house. The night outside was eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I tried to distract myself by tidying the kitchen, but my eyes kept flicking to the front door. It was close to midnight when headlights swept across the living room wall. My heart leapt into my throat. I peeked through the curtain. It was Daniel's car. He got out slowly, looking around the street before heading up the walkway. I noticed he was still wearing the same jacket, and my mind zeroed in on the place where I knew the gun was tucked. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called out from behind it. "What's going on, Daniel? Where have you been?" There was a pause. Then his voice, cool and measured. "Open the door, Emily. We need to talk." "I think we can talk just fine through here," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Another pause. Then softer. "You've been watching me, haven't you?" A shiver ran down my spine. He knew. Somehow he knew about the cameras. "I don't know what you're talking about." I lied. His laugh was low and humorless. "You always were smarter than I gave you credit for. But you should have stopped digging when you had the chance." I could hear him moving closer to the door. My mind raced for something, anything, that could buy me time. And then, just as his hand closed around the doorknob, a pair of blinding headlights flooded the driveway, followed by the unmistakable sound of car doors slamming shut. The pounding in my ears nearly drowned out the footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Daniel froze, his hand still gripping the doorknob. Then came the knock, sharp, commanding. "Police, open up." Daniel turned his head toward the door, and in that split second, I caught a glimpse of something I hadn't seen in months. Fear. He hissed at me through the door. "Don't say a word." But before he could take another step, the door burst open with a force that made me stumble back. 2 officers stormed in, their flashlights cutting across the room. "Daniel Harris, you're under arrest for conspiracy, illegal arms possession, and fraud," one officer announced, his voice booming in the stillness. Daniel's eyes darted toward me, a mixture of betrayal and rage. "You did this," he spat. I didn't answer. I just stood there, my hands clenched at my sides, watching as they cuffed him. Michael entered a moment later, his face set, but his eyes softening when they met mine. "We have everything we need now, Emily," he said quietly. "The warehouse was full of evidence. This is over." As they led Daniel out, his voice echoed down the driveway. "You think you've won? This isn't over." The door closed behind them, and for the first time in months, the house felt different. The air seemed lighter, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath. Michael stayed behind to go over the next steps with me. Statements, court dates, protective measures. I barely heard him. My mind kept replaying Daniel's face the moment the mask finally cracked. "You're safe now," Michael assured me. "Safe." The word felt foreign, almost unreal. I glanced at the laptop still open on the counter. The camera feed was still running, recording every second. A part of me wanted to shut it all down, erase the evidence, pretend none of this had happened. But I knew better. This chapter wasn't fully closed yet. As Michael prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You know, Emily, you've been stronger than you realize. Most people wouldn't have lasted this long." I gave him a small smile. I didn't think I would either. He left, and I stood in the doorway for a while, looking out at the empty driveway. The night was quiet again, but my mind was anything but. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, letting the silence settle. My life with Daniel had been built on lies, but I wasn't going to let it end in fear. Because now, I finally had the truth. And the truth was the one thing Daniel could never take back. The weeks that followed Daniel's arrest were a blur of court appearances, lawyer meetings, and long, quiet evenings alone in the house that no longer felt like a home. Every time I walked past the front door, I could almost hear the echo of that night. The pounding knock, the sharp command of the police, Daniel's furious voice. But something had shifted. I wasn't waking up with dread anymore. The air in my lungs felt cleaner, lighter. Michael kept me updated as the investigation progressed. It turned out the evidence from the warehouse, along with the footage from my hidden cameras, painted a damning picture. Daniel's list of charges was long, and the prosecution had enough to ensure he wouldn't see the outside of a prison for decades. "Emily, you need to think about what comes next for you," Michael said during one of our meetings. What came next? The phrase felt both terrifying and liberating. For so long, my life had revolved around surviving, keeping my head down, avoiding Daniel's wrath, pretending things were fine. Now, I had to imagine a future without him. I started small. I sold the luxury car Daniel had bought me as a trophy and used the money to pay off lingering debts he'd left in my name. I took long walks in the park without checking over my shoulder. I even redecorated the living room, stripping away every trace of his presence. The trial began in late spring. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, as the prosecution laid out their case. They showed videos from the warehouse, bank statements, and the clips from my cameras, Daniel's own voice discussing illegal deals, his arrogance dripping from every word. He never looked at me. Not once. When the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This was the man I had once loved, or thought I loved. Now he was just another criminal being led away in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I kept my answers short, my voice steady. "Justice was served," I said. "I hope this sends a message to anyone trapped in fear. You can take your life back." That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun sink below the horizon. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. And I knew this was only the beginning of the life I was meant to live. In the weeks after the trial, my days slowly settled into a new rhythm. Mornings were spent at the small bakery downtown, where the owner, Mrs. Harper, had offered me a part-time job after hearing my story. The scent of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls greeted me each day, a stark contrast to the cold tension that used to fill my home. I also started volunteering at a local shelter for women escaping abusive relationships. At first, I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to hear their stories without crumbling. But as I listened, I realized my own journey could serve as a light for others still trapped in darkness. One afternoon, while helping a young mother fill out housing forms, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said, "If you could get out, maybe I can too." That moment stayed with me. Daniel's sentencing came a month later. 25 years without the possibility of parole. When I heard the judge read the sentence, I felt a quiet, steady wave of closure wash over me. There would be no more late-night fear, no more wondering what scheme he was planning next. After the hearing, Michael and I walked out of the courthouse together. "You did it, Emily," he said, his tone warm but proud. "You fought back, and you won." I smiled faintly. "We won. I couldn't have done it without your help." Life moved forward in small, beautiful ways. I planted a garden in my backyard. Roses, lavender, and sunflowers. I painted the bedroom a soft shade of blue. I hosted Sunday dinners for friends, filling the house with laughter and music. And slowly, I began to trust myself again. Looking back, I realized the cameras I'd installed had been more than just a way to catch Daniel. They were a symbol. Proof that I was ready to see the truth, no matter how ugly it was, and to act on it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and fireflies danced over the grass, I sat outside with a notebook. I started writing my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. My hope was that someday, someone would read it and find the courage to take their first step toward freedom. Justice had been served, my dignity was restored, and my heart, though scarred, was open again to the possibility of love, friendship, and peace. I wasn't the same woman who had once tiptoed through her own home in fear. I was stronger now, strong enough to face whatever life threw my way, because when you survive the storm, the sunrise is even more beautiful. Dear friend, life has a way of testing us in the most unexpected moments. We think we know the people we love, we think our foundation is unshakable, but sometimes the storm reveals cracks we didn't even know were there. What I went through with Daniel wasn't just about betrayal. It was about rediscovering who I was when the world I knew collapsed. In the philosophy of Stoicism, they say, we cannot control the actions of others, but we can always control how we respond. I couldn't stop Daniel from lying, from scheming, from building a life on deception. But I could choose not to be broken by it. I could choose to protect myself, to seek the truth, and to rebuild, on my own terms. If you're facing something that feels impossible right now, remember this. Your worth is not defined by how someone treats you, but by how you rise when they try to bring you down. The ending of one chapter is not the end of your story, it's the opening line of a new one. Looking back, I see that every sleepless night, every moment of fear was shaping a stronger version of me. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. And now, when I wake up each morning, I am not haunted by the past. I am grateful for the sunrise, for my own resilience, and for the knowledge that I can face whatever comes next. Because the greatest victory is not in never falling, but in rising every single time.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.